When trying to figure out my research topic earlier this semester for this class, I wanted to find something that incorporated my interest in the Civil War, which is how I landed on the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. It was founded in South Carolina in 1858, and the seminary had kind of a rough start, and it almost didn't succeed. Started with only 4 professors and 26 students, and just 2 years into its existence, the Civil War broke out, so it nearly shut it down for good when it had to suspend classes. It's kind of hard to hold class when most of your students are in the Confederate Army. But after the war, the seminary managed to pick up where it had left off, and it's now one of the largest seminaries in America. Credit for the success goes largely to John Broadus, James Boyce, and Basil Manley Sr. and Jr. There are later figures in the seminary's history who made it successful, but I wanted to focus on just these 4 major figures in the early history of the seminary. So to start off, Basil Manley Sr. was the first to dream of a seminary for Baptists in the South. There were other seminaries in the South, but there wasn't one specifically for Baptists. So in 1835, he wrote an article discussing this dream that he had, but no one really paid much attention to it until the Southern Baptist Convention was formed in 1845, and the idea came up again. But it would still be another decade before any substantial action was taken to put this idea into place. His son, Basil Manley Jr., studied at Princeton Theological Seminary, and historian Brooks Hollifield talks about how while the younger Manley was a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama, he lamented how there were so few Baptist ministers who had the right education or right theological background to preach in these large urban areas. And these sentiments echoed sentiments similar to his father. Finally, in 1856, the Southern Baptist Convention appointed a committee to look into what kind of funds it would take and where a seminary would need to be located and other kinds of details like that to open the seminary. A year later, Boyce, Broadus, Manley Jr., William Williams, and E.T. Winkler were selected for a committee to organize the seminary. Now, John Broadus was a pastor in Charlottesville during this time. From the age of 19, he had a desire to join the Baptist ministry, but he wasn't really sure it was his calling until he heard a sermon on his way to study at the University of Virginia. Immediately after the sermon, he turned to a preacher sitting next to him and said, "The question's decided. I must try to be a preacher." And that settled it for him that the ministry was his calling. His family happily supported his decision to do this, and after he was ordained, Broadus then stayed in Charlottesville because he didn't really want to move around a lot. He wanted to stay at a familiar pulpit to preach. Now, unlike Broadus's parents, James Boyce's father wasn't happy when his son decided to join the ministry. He preferred that his son would become a lawyer or a doctor or some other what he called a respectable profession. But Boyce refused to let his father's negativity hold him back, so he attended Princeton Theological Seminary, and where he really enjoyed learning about systematic theology. And later, when the Southern Baptist Convention appointed him to the new seminary committee, Boyce was serving as a professor at Furman University. Now, throughout 1857 and early 1858, Boyce, Broadus, Manley Jr., and occasionally the other 2 men on the committee, Williams and Winkler, met to discuss the principles of the seminary and outline a plan of instruction, and really just kind of hammer out all the details that were necessary to establish it. When the convention met again in the spring of 1858, they selected Boyce, Manley Jr., Broadus, and Winkler to be its first professors. Unfortunately, Broadus and Winkler declined, and so the opening was delayed a year. Again in 1859, that spring, the convention met again and selected the same 4 men to teach. Again, Winkler declined, but Broadus was persuaded to leave his church in Charlottesville, and Williams took Winkler's place as a professor. The first semester of the seminary began in the fall of 1859 with these 4 professors and only 26 students from across the southern states. They held classes in a rent-free vacant church building, and things seemed to go well when 36 students enrolled the second year. Unfortunately, classes were disrupted by the outbreak of the Civil War, and only 20 students enrolled. The number continued to dwindle as the young men decided to enlist or volunteer for service in the Confederate Army. Even Boyce volunteered as a Confederate chaplain, so the seminary had to temporarily close during the war. Broadus also volunteered as a chaplain for a South Carolina regiment during these 4 years. Now, when the Civil War ended, Broadus, Manley Jr., Boyce, and Williams all met back in Greenville and decided whether or not they should reopen the school. They just wanted to figure out if it was worth it and if it would succeed. They decided to give it another shot, and they opened enrollment for fall 1865, but only 7 students showed up for class. Rather than let this dishearten them, they continued to persevere, and the seminary did better the following year. In 1877, they decided to move the seminary to Louisville, Kentucky, due to financial problems they were having, and they figured that they knew that donations and financial aid would be more forthcoming in Louisville, so they moved the seminary. During its early operation, both Boyce and Broadus served as presidents, and they got to see the seminary expand under their leadership. By 1889, enrollment was at 187, and 6 years later, it was at 312. Obviously, they had made the right decision to move because the seminary is still around today, offering bachelor's, master's, doctorate degrees, and providing preachers with the theological background that its founders had dreamed of.